In the last stream, we were working on setting up automation for the advanced mechanical crystal, which is actually the final mechanical crystal in the pack. And in doing so, we finally unlocked the end game questline, which begins with the After All These Years quest. It says, finally, I have them all. I understand everything now, the meaning behind all the crystals I have birthed into this universe. They were guiding me slowly, teaching me how to create stronger, more powerful catalysts in order to achieve the final goal. The final star awaits me. And as a reward, we get 64 nuggets of experience, which I don't know if we actually need. I know we can take these, I think, and just use them as experience by shift-right clicking, but just on the off chance we do need them at some point later in the pack, I'll store those away in our system. And now, right away at the start of the endgame questline, we get a new and I think final EMC-able item, that being the Essence of Darkness. Some say this is what the emptiness of space is made of. It's a 20,480 EMC, so a little pricey by comparison to a lot of the other stuff that we have in the pack, but obviously not particularly pricey given that we have 124 million EMC in our network. But as per usual, we'll go ahead, drop that in the transmutation tablet, and this is used in the metallurgic infuser to make some late game stuff, like black iron ingots are something that we're going to need quite a lot of to finish this pack. A couple of late game recipes require these black HDPE sheets, and I think there are also a few other uses for the Essence of Darkness as well, such as the enriched basilic reagent, which I believe is the highest tier of reagent that we can put into the pulverizer, so we could use this to even further increase our ore processing capabilities. But that's not what we're going to work on in today's stream, because last stream we were working over here on this automation and it's almost good. However, I made one fatal mistake, and that fatal mistake was not putting down a cable right here to connect the energy from this flux point to this multi-servo press, which means that we've got a ton of these inert advanced mechanical essences that are not able to be processed. You'll see in the top left, we have gained a little bit of EMC since the end of the last stream. I think we ended with about 118 million, but that's very slow. It's been a little while since the end of the last stream, and gaining about 7 million is not a particularly large amount. And so I think we could do with making this faster. Again, the problem right now is the fluid encapsulator. It is very, very, very slow, even with the 3 flux linkage amplifiers and the reinforced integral component. So I think what I'm going to do right away here is just place down a couple more fluid encapsulators. I requested a few more between streams so we can put them down fairly easily. A couple of people in the YouTube comments did point out that we do have access to the Watch of Flowing Time, which is up here, and I'm going to get to that at some point in the near future, but I think for the time being, we can potentially very carefully get rid of that and just throw down a few more fluid encapsulators like this, at which point I think it's probably also worthwhile moving this over by one to here, doing something like this, because I think the multi-servo press is going to be able to keep up with all 4 of these. So we'll just fill everyone with flux linkage amplifiers. We don't quite have enough. I do need 2 more if I want to fill this fluid encapsulator, but if we set all of those to output on the right, and we just throw down some logistical transporters, we should be able to essentially quintuple the speed at which we are producing EMC from this system, assuming we're producing the inert advanced mechanical essence fast enough to keep up with how fast these are using it, and I guess also assuming that we're making enough refined fuel, which could be potentially our next bottleneck. But either way, let's do this, 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 and this, and then I think we'll just go ahead and run the power cables underneath. I don't think any of these require a Pretty Pipes connection, and so unlike everything else that's connected to Pretty Pipes at the bottom, we should be able to just run some basic universal cable under all of these if we do something like that and like that. That should give all of those power, and so long as that is set to input on the left, which it is, I think we should be basically good to go. The final step, of course, is to actually connect these up to here with the mechanism advanced mechanical pipes, and of course set all of these to input from the top as well. Now, like I said, refined fuel could quite well be the limiting factor here, but either way, I think this is a better system than what we had before. because it does allow us to get even more EMC even faster, which I think is something we're definitely going to need. Oh, and of course, the final piece of the puzzle actually is to connect all of these up over here like this. And it's quite possible that we might want to get a round robin augment to allow this, whoops, that's not what I want to do. I wanted to do that, to allow this extraction module to input to all of the fluid encapsulators evenly. The round robin module is not too expensive, 1 flint, 3 redstone, and 1 blank module. That all seems very doable. Of course, if you happen to have a blank module in the system, thankfully they're also very easy to make. Boom, and boom. And so now I think if I take these 50 and just drop them back in here, ideally into the basin, that should, I think, just extract them out and distribute them amongst, yeah, all of the different fluid encapsulators. So they should all end up with an even number of inert advanced mechanical essence. Let's quickly go and check on the refined fuel. I think all we might have to do is get a couple more flux linkage amplifiers and a few more integral components to make some of the machines in here just that little bit faster. Right now, our limiting factor is these bottom 3 fractionating stills. They do all have the reinforced integral component, but none of them have any flux linkage amplifiers. And so you know what? Let me quickly go and grab maybe 9 more flux linkage amplifiers. We'll make it 11. That way we can fill up the last fluid encapsulator over there as well and get all of them nice and full on the flux linkage amplifiers. That does remind me, over here a few episodes back, people did point out in the YouTube comments that I failed to reconnect up my lead ingots when I set up the XNet cable here, which is why when I just tried to request some more of those flux linkage amplifiers, it didn't work. There is a very easy solution to that problem though, which is to just move this piece of XNet cable right here and have it go around, not like that, but like that, and then we can put this pipe back in right about there, and that gives our system once again access to lead. And so now if I were to once again try and request 11 more flux linkage amplifiers, our system should be able to do that fairly easily. And there we go, not too long later, 11 flux linkage amplifiers. Let's place 2 of those in over here, 1 and 2, and then over in our compact machine we'll fill all of the fractionating stills here with flux linkage amplifiers, and then we can move on to what I actually want to work on in today's stream, and that is a mechanism fission reactor. Because although we have unlocked the end game, there is still at least one quest that we need to work on in tier 4. That's this one right here, the fission reactor. It says the fission reactor is a large mechanism multi-block which can burn fissile fuel to heat large amounts of water into steam. How do you build it? I don't know, Google it, or look it up on a YouTube tutorial. It does not, however, produce power by itself. Beware of nuclear meltdowns, manage your nuclear waste properly, and ensure that enough coolant, in brackets water, is available to your reactor at all times. And then following that is the steam turbine, which kind of goes hand in hand with the fission reactor because the steam turbine is the bit that actually can produce power. It says here the steam turbine, another large multi-block, lets you use all of the steam the fission reactor produces to generate power. It cools down back into water, which you can then feed back into the reactor. Caution, if the turbine's internal power buffer gets full, it will stop cooling down steam, which will result in a bad time if you depend on that steam being cooled for your reactor's coolant. Again, just search a tutorial on how to build a good turbine. This is something I learned the hard way. I didn't think that when the turbine filled up on power, it would stop working. I figured it'd just keep going and just delete the excess power, but it does in fact stop working, and that does in fact cause nuclear meltdowns, which is not ideal. But we're going to hopefully account for all of that in today's stream. So the first step, of course, is getting the fission reactor up and running. And the fission reactor itself is not too difficult to make. There are a few different components, as shown in the quest line here. There is the fission reactor casing, the reactor glass, the fission reactor ports, we're going to need a few of these, and the fission fuel assembly. There is one thing that the quest book does not have, and that is the assembly control rods, I think is what they're called. Let me type in control rods. It is these guys right here. The control rod assembly is something else we're also going to need. So the first thing that I'm going to do here, of course, is teach our system how to make basically everything here, because although we're going to start with a fairly small reactor in today's stream, going forward, we're going to probably have to make a very large fission reactor, because looking a little further forward towards the end game, the final star requires a fair bit of antimatter. And for those unfamiliar with how this works, antimatter is made with antimatter liquid, which you get in a supercritical phase shifter from polonium. The polonium is made by running nuclear waste through a solar neutron activator. This is a 10-to-1 ratio, so you need 10 times as much nuclear waste as you do polonium, and every millibucket of antimatter requires 1,000 millibuckets of polonium, and every antimatter ingot requires 1,000 millibuckets of antimatter. So there's orders of magnitude here that require a lot of nuclear waste, and when you have a fission reactor, 1 millibucket of fissile fuel makes 1 millibucket of nuclear waste. So we're going to need a lot of fissile fuel, a ton more fissile fuel than what we're currently making at some point in the future, and we're going to have to set up a fission reactor that is big enough to process a massive amount of fissile fuel very quickly so that we're not waiting an eternity to get enough nuclear waste to make that polonium, to make that antimatter. That's the plan. For now, though, we're going to start with a fairly small fission reactor, and we can increase it in size in the future. But, of course, if we teach our system how to make all these things, making it bigger in the future shouldn't be that big of a deal. So we'll teach it the casing, apply. We'll also teach it the reactor glass, which is also needed for the turbine as well, I might add. Then we'll get the reactor ports. You're going to need quite a few of these. The fissile fuel assembly, apply. And then finally, the control rod assembly. Now, I think our system knows how to make almost everything else in here. The reactor glass requires some enriched iron. This our system already knows how to make because it's part of the steel making process. The only thing it might not know is the chemical tank right here. I think that might be the only thing our system currently doesn't know how to make, and so I'll go ahead and actually, before I hit apply, let me just check that our system does indeed not know how to make a chemical tank. It does not. Okay, fine. That is not going to be a problem. Let's just quickly add that to the list, apply, and then, of course, as per usual, we can grab a couple of our medium crafting modules and get all of these encoded so the Pretty Pipes network knows what it's doing. All right, so once all of those are encoded, a lot of the recipes here just require a fair amount of steel. The steel casing, of course, is a lot of steel, as well as some glass and some osmium. The reactor glass is some more enriched iron. The fissile fuel assembly is steel and lead, and then the controller rod assembly is more steel and more lead. Lead, we have an abundance of. Steel, not so much. Over here, we should be able to grab a little bit more steel out of here. We can indeed. And then it's quite possible that we could probably get another stack or two fairly quickly by accelerating this energized smelter. We've got over 26 hours worth of time in our bottle here, and so if we just make this nice and quick, we can probably take a couple more stacks of steel just to make all of the auto crafting here so much faster, because the turbine as well requires just a tremendous amount of steel, and right now our metallurgic infuser system is not the fastest. So we'll take all of that, we'll dump all of that into some part of our system, and then down here, let's start requesting some of this stuff. So I think the fissile fuel casing will go for maybe like a stack and a half to start with, a fissile fuel casing. For the reactor glass, we'll go for maybe a stack of reactor glass to begin with. Then we need fission reactor ports. I think we might just need 4 of these. I'll request 4 of those. The fission fuel assembly will take maybe half a stack of those. These are rough numbers. These are not the perfect amounts. It says basic chemical tank not found, fission fuel assembly not found. Oh, of course, that's one thing that I did not add to the Pretty Pipes here. Let me quickly make sure that our system knows how to do the chemical tank. There we go. And then we should be able to request that half stack of fissile fuel assembly. Oh, maybe I can only request 1 at a time? Oh, that's awkward. I think that's because of the fact that the chemical tanks don't stack. That's really awkward. The control rod assembly, I think we're only going to need 5 of those. Of course, as per usual, we do have to add all of this stuff to the wall, which is why it's all backing up currently in the ender chest there. That is fine. Let's do some of these. Good stuff. And then we should see things flying into our crafting terminal slowly but surely. So the basic idea of this is we're going to start at least with a 5x5 multi-block. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the final mechanical crystal. And so the rest of this platform is kind of free game. So I think what we are probably going to do is build 2 5x5 multi-blocks here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to be the turbine. We'll then have a gap of maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll have another 5x5 here. That's going to be our fission reactor. So in fact, let's go ahead and drop down initially a 5x5 of reactor casing. From there, the edges of the reactor have to be made out of fissile casing. So we'll go 2, 3, 4, and 5, not this one here. I'm fairly certain the walls can also be made of fissile reactor casing, but I think it looks nicer with the reactor glass. We'll then go 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're basically going to fill in this outer frame with fission reactor casing. And I think the stack and a half that we have should be more than sufficient for that. It is, and we can also make it a bit bigger in the future should we wish. From there, what we want to do is we want to place down the fuel assembly in the center, like this. And these are going to go almost all the way to the top, but you're going to leave one block gap before the top, and that is for the control rods. So let's go and quickly see, do we have a couple of control rods in here? We do not. I notice we have one in the system. Can I request 4 more? I can. Oh, of course, for some reason the first time I tried that, it just sent me 5 advanced control circuits. Not quite sure why. But either way, once we have 5 control rod assemblies, these essentially go on top of all of the fission fuel assemblies, like this. And you can put as many of these in as you like. I don't think you have to put them in this array that I've put them in here. I'm fairly certain that if you wanted to, you could really pack these in as much as you'd like. You just need even more of these control rod assemblies if you want to pack more of them in like that. Alternatively, you could just go higher. So if we wanted to, we could make this whole thing 1 higher, 2 higher, as high as we want, really. There almost certainly is a maximum to how high we can go, but for all practical purposes, you can just make this taller and add more of these fission fuel assemblies without needing more control rod assemblies. The final piece of the puzzle is to fill in the edges here with reactor glass. I'm pretty sure that, again, the top and the bottom do need to be reactor casing, although you might be able to use glass for the top and bottom as well. I'm not entirely certain. You know what? Let's give it a try. Let's fill in the sides here with reactor glass, of course, trying as we go not to randomly place blocks down where they don't need to go. And then we can give it a try with reactor glass at the top because that might work. It does. Nice. You'll know it's worked when you get those red particle effects. And here we have a fission reactor. So the whole idea of the fission reactor, as we showed earlier, is that it will turn fissile fuel into nuclear waste. It will also turn water, or any other kind of coolant that is tagged as Minecraft water, into steam. This water is used to cool the reactor down. You'll see right here there is a temperature. Right now it's at 330 Kelvin. If you don't pump enough coolant into the reactor, then the reactor will melt down, it'll explode, and it will cause radiation to inhabit the area around the base, which is not very good. You'll die instantly. It is not a good time. And so that's why you need to add coolant. That coolant is turned into steam, and then that steam needs to be gotten rid of. You could just dump it, but you can also use it in a turbine, and that turbine can use the steam to spin the turbine and generate energy. In doing so, it also cools down the steam, which you can then, if you want, pump back into the reactor to cool it down once again. That's the general idea. Now, the way that it works is that if you click the little stats button in the top left, you'll see that the current burn rate is set to 0.1 millibuckets per tick. So that's how many millibuckets of fissile fuel this reactor is going to burn per tick. Again, there are 20 ticks per second in Minecraft, so whatever you type in here, it's going to be multiplied by 20. You'll see right now the maximum burn rate is 10 millibuckets per tick. So the biggest number that we can type in here is 10, and that's going to change the rate limit. If I try 11, it's not going to work because we don't have enough of these fission fuel assemblies. The more of those you have in the reactor, the more fissile fuel that you can burn at the same time, but also the more coolant you're going to need because you're also going to have to cool down a hotter reactor. So if I was to take one of those rods out and look in here again, you'll see that now we can only do 8 millibuckets of fissile fuel. So essentially, every one fission fuel assembly that you add adds an extra millibucket per tick that can be processed by the reactor. So, of course, we need to do a few things here. First of all, we need to get fissile fuel into that reactor. Our fissile fuel is being made over here. We do have 185,000 millibuckets of fissile fuel backed up, which is fantastic. And this is where the ports are going to come into play. So there's only one type of port here for the fission reactor, and that's the fission reactor port. We're going to put a few of these in around the reactor. So we'll have one over here. And I think what we'll do is we'll probably just have one on each of the 4 sides of the reactor. One is going to be to bring coolant in, so we're going to bring water in via one. One's going to bring fissile fuel in. One is going to take the steam out, and then the final one is going to take the nuclear waste out. Now, the way this works is you take the configurator and you just shift right click on the port, and it will cycle through the different options available. So there's input only, output coolant, and output waste. So for us, we need a few things. Of course, we need the fissile fuel, and I think the easiest thing for us to do here is probably going to be to get some pressurized pipes. Now, we've not made any so far. However, Mechanism adds a fourth cable that we've not yet used. We've used items, we've used liquids, and we've used energy cables, but we've not used the pressurized cables. These ones right here are used for moving Mechanism gases. As per usual, they're fairly easy to make. We'll take a few of those just as soon as we get ourselves some more glass. The basic tier is going to be more than enough, by the way. These can move 750 millibuckets per tick of fissile fuel. And given that each one of these fuel assemblies only increases the amount the reactor can process by 1 millibucket per tick, we would need a massive reactor with over 750 of those fissile fuel assemblies before we needed to upgrade to the next tier of tubing. But if that does become something that we need to do in the future, as we did with our logistical transporters down here, we can just right-click the higher tier alloy and we'll go from 750 to 2,000 millibuckets per tick. So let's get rid of this piece of concrete right here, and then let's run a basic pressurized tube from there all the way around, I think, to the front of the reactor, so all the way around to here. All right, once that is connected, we should be able to go over to here, and we should be able to set the bottom of this to output. Now, that's going to get rid of basically all of our fissile fuel right away, which is less than ideal, and we might even end up setting up like a secondary fissile fuel setup. I might end up duplicating this maybe over here somewhere so that we have a dedicated setup for making fissile fuel for the reactor, just so that we can keep our EMC production online. For now, though, over here, we do have 80,000 millibuckets of fissile fuel. The other 100,000, by the way, is just in the pipe here. So you'll see there's 107,000 millibuckets of fissile fuel set in this pipe, and you'll see it's just over halfway full. The pipes can hold quite a bit. It's 4,000 millibuckets per tick there, which I think might be 4,000 millibuckets per pipe. But either way, we've got a lot of fissile fuel and a lot of fissile fuel in the reactor. Right now, if I were to click activate, it would get very hot very fast, and the damage percentage would start to go up because the reactor would be too hot. Now, to compensate for that, we need coolant, and the amount of coolant you need is directly proportional to your burn rate. So if we set this to 0.1, we're probably not going to need a lot of water. However, if we want to go higher than that, if we want to go to 10 millibuckets, we're going to need quite a bit of water. Now, up until now, we've been using the Evertide Amulet, and I think the Evertide Amulet is definitely the way to go here as well. Let me quickly grab a few more iron buckets, and you'll see we are starting to run low on iron here once again. We're not producing that iron fast enough. We'll take a look at that in just a little bit here, but let's grab a couple of buckets of water, and then let's see, can we get yet another Evertide Amulet? We can indeed, and then we could use a Mechanism tank here, just like we've been doing for everything else. However, I don't think this is going to be fast enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the highest tier of mechanical pipe that we can. That is this one right here, the ultimate mechanical pipe. It can pump 32,000 millibuckets per tick. It does require an atomic alloy. However, last time we did set up a new batch of metallurgic infusers, one for processing with diamond and the other for processing with enriched obsidian. And so really all that we should have to do here is make sure that this is set to input on the right, and then make sure that you are set to auto eject to the left. It is indeed. And then from there, there are two things we need to do. We need to teach our system how to make the refined obsidian. So we need to teach it how to make the refined obsidian dust, which it does via the use of a metallurgic infuser. This recipe is easy enough to teach because we already have this metallurgic infuser. However, the obsidian powder is the one that's a little trickier. We could do it with the create wheels, but the easier option is with the enrichment chamber from Mechanism. The only problem that we're going to run into is that we don't currently have an infinite source of obsidian being made because our blast chiller is currently offline. So I think what we will do, as I mentioned a few streams back, is we'll maybe get rid of one of these drawers and we'll move our current drawer full of obsidian over there. Along with that, we'll also move the blast chiller as well. So we'll put the blast chiller down behind that drawer, like that. We can then set the right side there to output, and we can set the top to input, and we'll turn auto input on as well. At that point, it should just be a case of us getting another ender tank from our lava network, so another ender tank set to white, 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 which we might already have, actually. I feel like I made a ton of extra ender tanks, although I guess not. Let me quickly check the backpack here. Yeah, no, I thought I made more than I had. That is fine. Do we have what it takes to make another ender tank? We do not. We just need another cauldron and another ender pearl, though, both of which we can make fairly easily. And boom, there is our ender tank. As per usual, let's not forget to add a diamond to that, and we'll basically just drop that down on top of our blast chiller. boom, and boom. There we go. We can then drop down another flux point. Let's do you and you. And then from there, we should start once again creating obsidian. And that's going to keep pumping that obsidian over into this drawer. And we now have basically unlimited obsidian. Nice. Now, the last step, of course, is to automate an enrichment chamber. We've not done that yet. And I think I'll steal this one over here. We don't really have any space left over on the mechanism side of the room because we've got just so much stuff over here. We do have a lot of enrichment chambers, but they're all being used for metallurgic infusers, and so they're not really general purpose ones that we can use for anything, but that's fine. We can add our enrichment chamber down over here, and just like we've done with all of the other machines, we can grab that ender chest we had in our system, place that down directly beneath it, like that, and of course it's a little different for the mechanism machines, because as we saw over there, you can't auto-input with a mechanism machine, so we are going to have a chest that goes like up here, and then another logistical transporter that extracts down into the enrichment chamber. Once that's down, we can then open this up, drop in yet another medium crafting module, and if we grab a little bit of our obsidian, we should be able to start running that through here. We can, and then we can teach our network up in here that 1 obsidian equals 4 obsidian dust. Nice. Let's make sure the input is set to the top. It is. The bottom is set to output, and the auto eject is turned on, and that should just work. So now over here, we want to teach a similar recipe. Here, we're going to teach that 1 obsidian dust equals 1 refined obsidian dust. So up in here, we'll do the same thing again. Medium crafting module, 1 obsidian dust equals 1 refined obsidian dust. And then over here, the final step, of course, which we've already done, is to have our system request refined obsidian dust. And now that it knows how to make it, it should just keep crafting it and sending it in here until we have a backlogged full stack of refined obsidian dust that the enrichment chamber here can use to power this metallurgic infuser, and then in turn, this metallurgic infuser here now allows us to take reinforced alloys and use them in the making of atomic alloys, just as soon as we add things like obsidian dust and enriched obsidian to the crafting wall. Alright, so a little bit of time later, I accidentally recorded a couple of minutes of video with my microphone muted. It happens to the best of us, but basically all I did is I taught my system how to make the atomic alloys, so it now knows how to turn reinforced alloys into atomic alloys, and then I took that and taught the system how to make the ultimate mechanical pipes. I taught it how to make all of the previous pipes as well, because those are required for the mechanical pipes, and then I requested 32 of those ultimate mechanical pipes. I also got another Evertide amulet, and I filled the reactor with water, but what I was showing off here was that the basic fluid tank here is good, but it's for some reason artificially slow. So real quick, in here, we'll set this to 10, the highest we can, and we'll turn it on, activate. That's going to tear through the water very quickly, and then we'll hit scram to make sure that the reactor doesn't melt down. So if I were to, let's set that back to 0.1 for now, and before I forget, if we were to put this down, put in the Evertide amulet with this set to empty, and set this to extract, this empties out very quickly, and therefore fills up the fission reactor very slowly, like really slowly, and this is obviously filling up way slower than the reactor was just emptying, which is not ideal. However, what we can do is we can take that Evertide amulet and we can put it into a dynamic tank from Mechanism, which is basically a big customizable multi-block tank that for some reason doesn't have the artificial limit of how fast the water can go into it. So for this, you just need some dynamic tank, which we've made before. It's steel and a bucket, and you need at least one dynamic valve. This is more dynamic tank with a basic control circuit. The smallest dynamic tank that you can make, if I'm not mistaken, is a 3x3 cube with the center being hollow. So it's going to look something a little bit like that. You don't need this piece here. And you do need at least one valve if you want to be able to pipe in or out of the tank. So we'll put down the valve right about there. That should connect up to the mechanical pipe. It does. And now, if we were to put the Evertide amulet in here with this set to empty, this one is just always full. It's constantly full all of the time. And we're effectively transferring water into the reactor at the limit of the ultimate mechanical pipe. So we were just doing 32,000 millibuckets per tick because that is the pump rate. That's how much this pipe can extract from this valve per tick. Now, the good news about that is that we can increase the amount that we're extracting per tick by simply adding another valve, because now if we do this here and this here, and we connect both of those up, this one right here is going to extract 32,000 millibuckets per tick, and this one here is also going to extract 32,000 millibuckets per tick, giving us effectively 64,000 millibuckets per tick of water extraction. You do want to make sure, as per usual, that you don't have your wrench set to wrench mode, your configurator set to wrench mode. You want it set to anything but that. But if we set both of these to extract, now this is filling up much, much faster because it's pulling in so much more water. And again, this is not emptying. This is just constantly full, which is cool. So now, if we click activate, this is fine. It's filling up on Steam, and the water isn't budging. We have enough coolant because of the fact that right now we're only doing 0.1 millibuckets per tick. If we try and go back to 10 millibuckets per tick, I think that, yeah, we're still not producing enough water. Even 64,000 millibuckets per tick isn't enough water. Thankfully, that's rectifiable. We can add even more valves, and if needs be, we can make this even bigger. So let me request a stack of basic control circuits, just so we can make a few more valves. You can only put the valves in the faces of the dynamic tank. I don't believe you can put them in the edges, so you can only put them, you know, here, 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 maybe, I don't know if it'll go in the top, but I think it will, here, and then potentially on the bottom as well. So if we wanted to get more than, you know, maybe 6 valves in here, we would have to make this bigger. Thankfully, making it bigger is super easy. Again, the middle does have to be hollow, so we would have to get rid of this bit of the tank right there. But if we just did something like that, it should form another tank that is now even bigger, and of course has even more slots along the sides for even more of these dynamic valves. And so the idea now is basically to put down even more dynamic valves and just keep going until we get to the point that we have enough dynamic valves to keep up with ideally 10 millibuckets per tick of fissile fuel. Then the question becomes, how many millibuckets per tick of fissile fuel are we making? And you can see here we're going 830, 40, 50, 60, 10 millibuckets per tick is 200 millibuckets per second, which right now we're not doing, right? Otherwise, it'd be going up from 100 here to 300 to 500 to 700. It'd be going up in increments of over 200. So right now, we're not producing enough to run this at 10 millibuckets per tick, but it's going to be ideal for us to at least get the cooling to be able to handle that. And then, of course, we can look at making our fissile fuel production faster to compensate. We're probably not going to be able to make our fissile fuel production faster until we get more power, but of course, that's where the turbine comes in. We can build the turbine. The turbine produces a large amount of power that we can then use to increase our fissile fuel production, which will in turn produce more steam and therefore more power, and that should hopefully just kind of keep itself going. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's get rid of this recipe right here. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4 tanks with the basic control circuit, and let's make a couple more of these valves. So we'll start with 8 more, and we'll fill this in. We're going to do these one at a time. There's no point in going crazy on it. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, and we'll do you. And then we'll connect all these up, and we'll see if that is enough to sustain 10 millibuckets per tick. Of course, we do have a large backlog of fissile fuel, so we can do a fair bit of testing here. Oh, not quite. It's close. You'll see it's going down slower than it was before, and it's going down very slowly, but it is not quite there. Let's try 2 more on this side. Let's try here and here. We'll set both of these to extract as well, and we'll see if that is enough. It looks like it is. It looks like that is holding steady at just over 12 million millibuckets of water. I'm going to stop this before we fill up on steam. That's what this is right here. We need to make sure that we don't fill up on steam. Otherwise, I think the reactor will start to overheat as well. And the final thing that we need to do is get rid of the nuclear waste. You'll see we're slowly but surely getting nuclear waste. This is radioactive, so don't touch it. Don't carry it around or anything like that. Thankfully, the quest that we completed earlier, this one right here, does give us 10 radioactive waste barrels that can hold 512,000 millibuckets of nuclear waste each, and these are also not very difficult to make. It's just lead and steel, and what we'll do is we'll just put these down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, like that. And from there, we can just take even more of the basic pressurized tubing, which I'm hopeful we can make yet more of. We can, and we can use this to extract from here as soon as we set this to output nuclear waste, and we can do something like this, and distribute that nuclear waste amongst all these barrels. Once you've done this, by the way, you cannot pick these barrels up until they have no nuclear waste in them. So right now, if I were to shift right click on these, it says no gas stored. In here, though, we've got 4,900 millibuckets of nuclear waste. So if you have an empty barrel that you shift right click and it says no gas stored, you can pick that up. That's fine. If you try and pick up a pressurized tube that has nuclear waste in it, instant radiation in all of your base, and then you're going to die straight away. It's bad. If you do the same thing with the radioactive waste barrel, if you try and pick this up, instant nuclear waste. Unfortunately, you can't delete this. There's no like easy delete button on the nuclear waste. However, in this pack, the creator has been quite kind and they've added a custom recipe here for stable spent nuclear waste. So what we can do is we can take the nuclear waste, turn it into polonium or plutonium, and then when we process that into polonium or plutonium pellets, these, by the way, are required to make the components of the supercritical phase shifter that is required to make antimatter. But nevertheless, once we've used our nuclear waste to make polonium or plutonium, we can then turn it into spent nuclear waste that we can then turn into stable spent nuclear waste in a purification chamber, and then you can delete this. So there is a safe way of deleting nuclear waste in this pack, which I'm very happy about. But in general, chat, this is the fission reactor. And next time what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll look at setting the turbine up. The turbine is fairly straightforward and should allow us to produce a very large amount of power with fairly minimal effort. And once we have both of those up and running, we can start to have a look at some of the endgame quests. We can look at getting a wither setup up and running. We can look at getting some ether gas, which we're going to need for a few late game recipes. We can look into getting nitro crystals from power, automating the production of precision mechanisms from create. We can even potentially start to look at getting these ultimate singularities that do require a lot of different resources, but for the most part, this should just be a case of increasing the speed of a lot of the systems that we already have in place, making things like our enrichment chambers down here, making diamonds, redstone, lapis, and glowstone faster. Over here, making all of these machines faster and increasing the amount that each one of these compacting drawers can hold and sending all of those two machines to be made into singularities. I actually don't think that this is going to be the biggest of our problems by a long shot, but all of those are problems for future, Isaac. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Mechanical Mastery there.